In Flesh and Blood, you can use any card in your hero's class, but there is one exception to that rule. Specialization cards. Specialization cards can only be played in the deck of the hero it was designed for. Specialization cards help a hero's specific strategy, and they can range from a variety of levels of usefulness. Today we're going to count down the top 10 best specialization cards in Flesh and Blood. A couple of rules before we begin. Only one specialization card per hero is allowed to be on the list. I want to keep things different. 2, how these cards apply to living legend heroes also counts for this list. 3, my opinion is objective fact, and if you disagree, you're absolutely wrong. Without further ado, let's begin. Given that Flesh and Blood is a very fast-paced game, doing a lot of setup can be difficult. So with that setup, there needs to be a big payoff. Tekla is the current king of the endgame, and his specialization card Singularity is his crown. Singularity is a legendary Tekla specialization, which says if you have 4 or more Evos equipped, 4 or more. If you have 4 Evos equipped, you can transform into Tekla the Mechapotent. It costs 3 to attack for 6, it blocks for 6 with Battle Worn, and it has 3 intellect. But with Evo Steel Soul Memory, that problem's fixed and you go right back up to 4. Mechapotent's effect says that all your Mechanologist attack action cards get Go Again, and if you attack with it, your opponent discards a card. And this counts as having 4 Evos equipped. For those who don't know, Evos are additional equipment that you can put on your base equipment, and if you have a certain number of Evos equipped, you can play these big attacks with Disruption and Overpower. I know I dogged on mech cards that give other mech cards Go Again in my last video, which you should absolutely watch. But given that Tekla doesn't play a lot of boost cards and is far more defensive than Dash Max or Data Doll, giving your big evasive attacks Go Again is far more useful here than in any of those other decks. And every time you attack, you guarantee strip 1 card from your opponent's hand. So this is just absolutely powerful. But the reason is that number 10, it's equipping 4 Evos can be difficult, and given that the best played set of Evos has Temper, there's a lot of cards that can destroy or weaken equipment. And that this card is a legendary specialization, meaning you can only play 1 of it. And given the mech class is known for boosting, which Tekla doesn't play a lot of boost cards, but he still might play a few, you can banish this card by mistake, and that's it, it's gone. So while this card is absolutely powerful, there are some barriers to playing it at its full potential. Reiner and Dorinthia are arguably this game's Blue Eyes and Dark Magician. They both have been given a ton of specialization cards over the years, so naturally I had to add at least one on the list. While Reiner's specializations are powerful, I didn't think they were powerful enough to go on this list. So the number 9 spot goes to Glistening Steelblade. For those who don't know, Dorinthia's main strategy is using her weapon, the Dawnblade, and hitting your opponent twice with it and getting +1 counters on it. Glistening Steelblade is a 1-cost yellow pitch Dorinthia specialization that says your next Dawnblade attack gets Go Again, and whenever your Dawnblade hits, it gets a +1 counter. So, if you hit twice, you get 3 counters. 2 from the Steelblade, 1 from the Dawnblade. Combo this with Ironsong Determination and make this card even more difficult than block. On top of that, you can also throw Twinning Blade in front of it and get even more value from this card. Glistening Steelblade kicks your Dawnblade strategy off very quickly, potentially doing what would normally take 3 turns to do so. So if this hits twice, your Dawnblade becomes a 1 for 6. Now, while this card is good, it still requires you to hit your opponent. And given that against Dorinthia most people will be loading up on defense reactions, it's still difficult to get value from this. Though some people do play this card in Dorinthia Quicksilver Prodigy, as Dawnblade Resplendent doesn't lose the counters even if you don't hit. I honestly almost feel bad for Bolton. He has so much potential as a hero, but LSS seems too iffy about giving him powerful cards. A lot of the cards they print for him are mediocre. For those who don't know, the main mechanic of the Light Warrior class is to charge cards from your hand into your hero's soul, so you need to keep your hand to typically send a below rate attack. But I can't deny that the setup does have a big payoff, being our number 8 spot, Lumina Ascension. It is a 0-cost yellow pitch Light Warrior action, and it's a Bolton specialization that reads, until the end of your turn, your weapons get +1, and if it hits, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a light card, put it into your soul and gain 1 life. And if you've charged this turn, you may attack with each of your weapons an additional time this turn. This card is so powerful that it inspired a whole deck called Combo Bolton, where you use Centauri Sabers, encourage a Blade Hold to make your sword's attacks free, and activate multiple Lumina Ascension a turn, because, yeah, they stack! And they are searchable with Beacon of Victory. Bolton has the ability to remove a card from Soul, and if you've charged, they give a target attack with attack greater than its base, Go Again. So, let's do some math here. Each Saber attacks for 2. You play 3 Lumina Ascensions, they get +3 and can attack 3 additional times each. Now that's 5 damage per Saber, 4 times each, that's 40 damage, and if that's not enough, your sabers get buffed by the effect that if it's blocked by an attack action card, it gets +1 until the end of the turn. One from its own effect, one from Bolton's effect. Now most combo Bolton decks will also use Calendry Gold, which costs 1 resource and gives your weapon attacks +1, all of them for the whole turn, meaning that it's actually 6 damage 8 times, which is 48 damage. Not to mention, if you use a card called Via the Vanguard, which buffs all your attacks as combat chain for each card you've charged with its effect, and combo it with the card Spirit of Irina, which allows you to play Lumina Ascension at instant speed, that's just even more damage. And playing a card with Go Again at instant speed refreshes your action point. But why is this card only number 8? Well, the charge mechanic is very weak, so setting up soul can be very challenging. And if you don't have enough soul, your opponent can just block you out, potentially not allowing you to gain any soul off of Lumina's ability. And even in combo Bolton, if you don't finish your opponent off, the deck doesn't have much in terms of damage after that. So while this card is absolutely super powerful, it's a bit of a glass cannon, which is why it's only number 8 on my list.
For a long time, Levia has been seen as a joke. While she has a lot of really strong above-rate attacks, her only ability was to turn off Blood Debt, meaning that she has the possibility of taking a whack load of damage and just dying right on the spot. That is, until Dusk Till Dawn gave us a new demi-hero in the form of Blasphemfet Levia Consumed and Levia Redeemed. This is the first demi-hero to hit Flesh and Blood, which will allow you to transform when certain conditions are met. As a recap, Shadow Brute cards banish from your graveyard as an additional cost, but they normally have Blood Debt, which means you'll take 1 extra damage for each card in your banish zone. If you hit 13, then you can turn into Blasphemfet, which instead of taking Blood Debt, you banish your cards face down for each Blood Debt damage you would have taken, and then, once per turn, you can play cards from your banish zone, allowing you to make use of these above-rate cards extra times per game. You can transform into Levia Redeemed if you have 13 or more Blood Debt cards in your banish zone, and she just makes your cards lose Blood Debt permanently. This card significantly improves Levia's late game and fixes a lot of the problems that she had beforehand. When you're playing into Blasphemfet, it essentially gives you a 5-card hand every turn, you just need to end the game before you mill yourself out. With Redeemed, you no longer have to worry about turning off Blood Debt, but you still need to worry about actually closing the game in normal means. While this card is absolutely busted and gives Levia the late game power she was desperate for, other cards on this list do a lot more on their own as opposed to needing to play into this Blood Debt minigame that Levia's demi-hero is reliant on. But I can't deny the power that this gave my favorite hero, Levia.
Number 6 is the reason a hero has hit Living Legend in Blitz. Blood on Her Hands is a Kasai Specialization. It's a cost 0 and a yellow pitch that lets you destroy any number of copper to activate 3 effects up to 2 times each. Those effects being your weapon gets +1, can attack a second time, and gets Go Again. With Kasai Centauri Sellsword's ability to make copper for each weapon that is hit whenever you attack 2 or more times, you can passively generate copper throughout the game and explode with a 2-card 12 at the end game. And in Blitz, that's phenomenal, especially late game. This card is still busted in Kasai of the Golden Sands, but just takes some extra work to pull off. This card is similar to Lumina Ascension, just easier to pull off. The only real downside is no copper, no power. Blood's power comes from its perfect synergy with OG Kasai's copper generation and already powerful 2-card hands. Since her release, Dash Inventor Extraordinaire has been a very flexible hero, being able to play defensively, offensively, or even mid-range. The Mech class's card pool gives her a lot of tools. Aside from her powerful boost cards, the other aspect of Dash's power lies in her items, and number 5 allows you to better use those items. Number 5 is the Dash Specialization, Spark of Genius. The Mech class is known for having fantastic items, and Spark of Genius lets you pay XX and search an item where its cost is X, and if you boost it, draw a card. Typically you play this, declare your 0, and get a card like Teklo Core, arsenal your card, and start your turn with a powerful 5-card hand, and 2 floating resource. You could also pay 4 to get something like Teklo Pounder or get an item with Crank and just keep the value going. Spark of Genius offers a lot of variety in terms of what you can do, and being able to search a card is incredibly powerful. Not to mention drawing a card on top of that lets you either set up or continue your turn. This card easily makes the number 5 spot. However, it doesn't do something that the number 4 card can do, and that is Time Walk your opponent. Now, number 3 and number 4 are kind of interchangeable because they're both extremely powerful cards that let you skip your opponent's next turn. Number 4 is the Azalea Specialization, Red in the Ledger. It's a red, 1-cost arrow attack action that says if this hits your opponent, they only get 1 action next turn. Meaning, if your opponent can make extra action points with something like Scabskin Leathers, too bad, they only get 1 action. It was really a tough call between this and Judge, Jury, and Executioner, but this card doesn't need an aim counter while Judge, Jury, and Executioner does, so it barely won out. This card is even better when you realize Azalea's power comes from her non-attack action that she plays to make her arrows stronger, and the fact she can give them Dominate. Sometimes you can get attacks as powerful as 12 or 14 Dominate. Not to mention, you can play this card several times in a game with cards like Memorial Ground, Codex of Frailty, and its searchable power by another Azalea spec, Knock the Death Whistle. Overall, this card is just busted and is the reason Azalea is powerful as she is today. What's better than limiting your opponent to one action? Ripping cards from their hand. Number 3 is Crippling Crush. Crippling Crush is a Bravo specialization that costs 7 and attacks for 11, and if it does 4 more damage to your opponent, they discard 2 cards at random. So, to prevent the crush, your opponent needs to block 8. Oh, and if you didn't know, Bravo's ability can give Dominate, but a bit more consistently than Azalea can. Once you play this card, no matter what, your opponent's losing cards, either through blocking or the crush effect. They won't be able to hit you as hard next turn. Not to mention, this card is also playable in Bravo Star of the Show, meaning this can get 13 Dominate Go again with his ability. This card is fantastic at taking advantage away from your opponent, and it takes very little setup, as with a card like Tectonic Plating, you can make a Seismic Surge and make the attack cheaper, potentially making this a 3-card 11. And with this card and 3 blues, you can dominate it, making it even harder for your opponent to block. And again, this card is also searchable by another Bravo specialization, Showtime. And Awakening, but Starvo ruined that because we can't have nice things. Like I said, while you can swap 3 and 4, and while trust me, it hurts to put Rend the Ledger at number 4 being an Azalea main, I can't deny that Crippling Crush is just a bit more consistent than Rend the Ledger and can time walk your opponent easier. Oh, and if you have Seismic Surge, Terror Sunder, and Arsenal, a Crippling Crush, and 3 blues in your hand, you can swing for 12, Dominate, on hit, discard 2, Crush, discard 2 more. This card is fucking disgusting. Continuing the trend of Guardian Time Walks, at number 2 we have the Oldhim specialization, Endless Winter. It's an Oldhim specialization that costs 4, swings for 8, and says Ice Fusion. If this card is fused, whenever your opponent adds a card to the chain link, they get a Frostbite. If it hits, whenever your opponent plays a card, they get a Frostbite. So for those who don't know, Fusion is when you reveal a card of the specified element to gain extra abilities. So basically, if you play this and your opponent blocks, they get Frostbites. If they don't block, they get Frostbites. No matter what they do, their next turn ends up becoming significantly harder. And given that Oldhim's strategy is setting up the late game, playing this late game absolutely screws your opponent over completely. Unlike Crippling Crush and Rend the Ledger, no matter what your opponent does, as soon as this hits the table, their next turn is screwed. Like, what's better than potentially making your opponent's next turn harder? Certainly making your opponent's next turn harder. Before we go over to our number 1, let me cover some honorable mentions. Honorable mentions include Starstruck for being another potential time walk, but if you play it against a deck like Brute, they can still go over it in some cases, so Crippling Crush is just a bit more consistent. Blazing Aether for having the potential to do a whack load of damage, but easy to counter if your opponent's sideboard's right. Also, I don't like Kano. Riptide Traps for being able to stop turns in their tracks, but are really easily counterable. Frost Hex for turning Frostbites into Rune Chants, and Raisin Army for being fantastic against fatigue decks. Prism was one of the best decks of her meta, countering even the dreaded Starvo. The reason she was able to do that is because of her Aura's Spectra. Spectra means you can attack into it, but the attack doesn't resolve, meaning you can't gain Go Again or on hits from attacking them. Attacking a Spectra card basically ends your turn, but at least you have the possibility to set up some kind of turn by gaining extra action points through cards like, I don't know, Time Skipper Boots or Lead the Charge, right? Right? Our number 1 spot for the best specialization in Flesh and Blood is the Prism specialization Arklight Sentinel. It is a light illusionist instant that costs 6 and says your opponent must attack it if it's on the field. So any setup you do for your turn can be completely shut off through this one card. Blood Rush Bellow? Nope. Crack Braveforge Braziers, activate Triple Lumina? Ha! Nope. Activate Blood on her hands? More like blood on the floor. That joke was terrible, I hate myself. This card is literally the equivalent of a high school movie where the bully smacks the lunch tray out of the kid's hand. No other card lets you instantly, at literally any other point in the game, stop your opponent's turn dead in its tracks. Your opponent literally can't do anything but cry and end their turn. Even the 6 cost isn't the problem, because if you have at least 1 yellow left over, you can activate Prism, create a Spectral Shield, and swing with your entire board of auras. Or, God forbid, you pitch 2 blues, have a yellow and a Herald in your hand after playing ALS from Arsenal. This card is just too good at stopping your opponent, and it's why it's, in my opinion, the best specialization card in Flesh and Blood. So, that was my list. Do you agree? Are you wrong? Let me know in the comments below. And a huge thanks to Man Sant for cameoing in this video. It was really sweet of him. I recommend his videos highly. He's overall just a really cool dude for agreeing to do this. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. See you next time.